Hey, it's been a while. Too long, in fact. It's been a while since the last time I've done something related to lost media, and that's a crying shame since I love lost media and the collective search around it. Often, lost media revolves around relatively small content that is lost because of a lack of archives available today. Sometimes it's a single episode, a small game made on Flash or Java, a dub of a show or movie, perhaps even an entire film suffering from development hell. But in today's case, we're talking about an entire first season of an animated series that was set to air in 2000, a cartoon to air on NBC, a large television network created by David Spade and Drake Sather, then two rising comedians in Hollywood who were hitting it big. A cartoon based on Spade's own life and starred him as the two lead roles. A passion project for Spade that was met with a brutal fate out of its control and was mistreated by the network, and led to a search effort 20 years after it was set to air. This is the story of Sammy. Back in the mid-80s, a man by the name of David Spade was beginning to make a name for himself as a comedian in LA, performing at different venues around the city and turning the heads of some Hollywood executives. One of these was Dennis Miller, another comedian now turned star of Saturday Night Live. Miller featured Spade in HBO's 13th annual Young Comedians show that year and was able to secure Spade a spot on SNL as a writer, before Spade became a cast member. From here, Spade's career exploded. He starred alongside his fellow SNL cast member Chris Farley in a couple buddy comedy films from the time. He was cast in the role of the main character in Disney's The Emperor's New Groove and had a handful of other side roles in different films. Among these noteworthy roles was his role as one of the main characters of NBC's sitcom Just Shoot Me, which was quite successful for the time. Thanks to his time on both SNL and Just Shoot Me, as well as becoming a movie star himself, that made him one of NBC's bigger, newer stars, which afforded him some push within the company. This would end up creating an opportunity for Spade to pitch an idea to the network during a venture they would take just before the turn of the millennium. During the 90s, adult animation became something of a new, trendy fad on TV, thanks to the massive success of The Simpsons and its more adult orientation. During this decade, we saw quite a number of classic adult animated series premiere across channels like MTV, Comedy Central, and Fox. Catching wind of this was NBC, who wanted to get in on this spike in the popularity of adult animation, and was looking for two animated series to put into production. One series pitched was a show created by Matthew Carlson, a television writer and producer known for his work on Malcolm in the Middle and The Wonder Years. Carlson's concept for an animated series was to make a modern adaptation of the story of Job from the Bible, although it would be set in modern day with a character named Bob. This show and its premise will be important for later, so let's put a pin in it. As for the second show, Spade pitched an idea to NBC for their consideration. The series would star a young comedian named James Blake, who has recently made it big in LA. This is until his father, Sammy, notices and tries to come back into James's life and try to repair their dysfunctional family, with the series focusing on the relationship between the father and son. This premise was based on Spade's own life, as his parents split when he was growing up. And since he and his brothers lived with their mother, the two weren't able to spend much time together. As Spade grew up though, his relationship with his father became rocky, and the two were at odds, but would come to begin improving things after Spade hit it big. The titular character of the show is even named after one of Spade's father's nicknames, Sam. Spade's father was even involved in the show, serving as a consultant for the writing of the show, likely in order to add a bit of himself into Sammy. Not much is known about exactly how the production of Sammy took place, but we do have a few things. The animation was handled by Adelaide Productions, a company known for their work on The Extreme Ghostbusters and Dragon Tales. What's strange about the series is that the directors and writers appear to change every episode, and one person will work on 2 episodes at most. We also have a few production materials, such as cells for the animation, as well as a note for animators to create a test animation featuring the characters. Before Sammy even hit the airwaves, however, there was already trouble brewing over at NBC. God, the Devil, and Bob would premiere on March 9th of 2000 on NBC, and due to the show explicitly depicting figures from the Bible, the show caused controversy among religious activists for its portrayal of God, with his design being directly inspired by Jerry Garcia, which was considered sacrilegious. Combined with the already low ratings of the airings of the first 2 episodes, NBC began to get cold feet on their plan and decided to scrap the show in its entirety. Fortunately for the show, though, the entire series would go on to be released on DVD a whole 5 years later, and NBC would sell the show to Cartoon Network, where it would have a second wind on Adult Swim in 2011. Thanks to these circumstances, the show is not only easily accessible today, but is considered a niche cult show from the era alongside the many other short-lived adult-oriented series on MTV and other networks. However, the controversy and the lack of the attention the original show's airings attracted meant bad news for Sammy. The low ratings of God, the Devil, and Bob promoted a leadership change within NBC. The new executives at the head of NBC now, however, wanted to axe all plans for animation entirely due to the poor performance of the aforementioned show. This actually happens a lot in show business, as executives typically don't want any part in plans set by previous company leaders unless said project is so indispensable. However, NBC had an obligation to air 2 episodes of the show as per the show's contract. And since production of the show would have either been completed or nearing completion at the time, NBC basically had to do something with the show. They rescheduled the premiere of the first 2 episodes many times as they tried to figure out what to do with the series before dumping 2 episodes onto TV in July. And when the series did premiere, the ratings were absolutely tragic. For starters, NBC didn't even air the first 2 episodes in chronological order. Instead, they aired episode 3 and episode 6. Granted, episode 3 was a good choice since it's one of the standout episodes, and one I would have picked. But episode 6, Sammy Makes Amends, isn't a good choice at all since it deliberately deviates from the concept of the show, and half of it literally takes place out of the usual setting. A much better choice would have been House of Pain, since it maintains the premise of the show and still highlights what it excels best at, that being the Blake family's dysfunction. The media coverage of Sammy from the time was particularly scathing. Review outlets bashed the show for its dry, witty comedic style, the show's art style, and the characters. At least, that's what I assume. The reviews of the time don't exactly say much beyond, "the show sucks." Regardless, the reception to the show was poor, and the show received a pitiful amount of viewers when it aired. And that was just it for the show. NBC didn't sell the show off. This could have been because of some contract thing with Spade, or something, or it could be because they didn't want to give the show to another company and let them profit off of the idea. That is what companies do after all. But the series lay dormant in the vault at NBC to rot away forever, and never be given its time to shine. Sammy rotted in the archives at NBC for 2 decades. For 20 years, the show never re-aired, was not sold off to another network, released on home media, not even any recordings of the original episodes had resurfaced. Not a single second of animation had been available online. Thanks to NBC's poor advertising of the series too, no promos were made for the series, at least as far as I'm aware. So no promos from around the time even contained footage of Sammy. The only surviving mention of the series were a few newspaper clippings reporting on the production of the series and articles online panning the series. Thanks to the limited amount of news coverage though, plus the fact that at least one person who saw the show when it aired remembered it and wanted to find it again, a page was created on the Lost Media Wiki and Lost Media Archive to mark it as Lost Media. Not too long after the pages were created, cells for the show were found online. A company that owned the cells that were used for the animation went under sometime after the show finished production, and the cells and other production material were sold off to buyers. 2 of these buyers uploaded photos of their cells to the internet, which gave us more content related to the series. But soon, some real momentum was about to pick up for the search for the series. On November 13th, 2020, Lost Media YouTuber El Supersonic Q created a video discussing Sammy and going over it. He goes over a tweet from a Twitter user where they pondered over Sammy remaining missing, in which they tagged several people who were involved with the show's creation. Surprisingly, the creator David Spade himself quote retweeted the tweet, lamenting, "I wish someone could find these episodes. I loved Sammy. NBC burned it off one summer years ago. Definitely too much for them. This was a cable show." After learning about the possibility of the show being a passion project of Spade's that the network didn't know what to do with and canned it before it could take flight, LSSQ tried reaching out to people who worked on the show. Unfortunately, no one he contacted responded to his inquiries, so he turned to a fellow Lost Media enthusiast known simply as Matt. Matt had been looking into the series for a short while before LSSQ asked about it, and Matt even got into contact with a crew member who worked on the show. Matt and LSSQ had gotten into contact with crew members who stated that they had their own tapes of the original episodes, but both kept their tapes in storage and wouldn't be able to access them until the holidays. I mean, okay. We would just have to wait a little while and we're basically on the precipice of finding the show, right? And with that, Matt and the community waited and waited, and then... Did you get that? Nothing. Absolutely nothing had happened or progressed throughout the holiday season. LSSQ would deliver the update, or I suppose lack thereof, on a live stream on January 30th of 2021.
Unfortunately, there's been nothing with the Sammy search, which I'm really disappointed about. When I made that video, I thought it was going to be like a really big, like popular video, because I don't really like David Spade. I just know he exists, but you know, he was very passionate about that show, so I thought like, oh, you know, it would be cool to like get this cartoon found for him, right? Two things were disappointing. One is that, I assume you watched the video, no one that claims they had the entire series on VHS, like Everett Peck, and there was another person too who Matt, one of my other Lost Media friends, contacted. Up to this point, no one has come forward and said they actually got those tapes. So that's disappointing on one end.
At this point, some people were skeptical of how close we were to actually getting this series found. As time passes, finding the episodes becomes less and less of a priority for contacts, and with each passing week, uncertainty began to surmount. Were we really that close to getting this series on our hands? Well, as it turns out, we weren't actually that far off after all. Matt maintained contact with this crew member, who was eventually able to locate the tape and informed Matt, who was excited to hear this. The process of getting the tapes digitized was going to take a while though, so the contact sent Matt the video files as they were digitized. There was also an error made during the digitization process, as a couple of the episodes skip over short portions of the episodes. Matt would go on to upload each episode to his YouTube channel, one after the other after he received each episode. And by the end of 2021, literally on the dot, the entire series of Sammy had been finally found and uploaded online with no issues. Finally, after all that time, and after good effort was made, Sammy had finally been found and put online, where it can remain presumably for all of eternity. And with the entire series now found, people were now able to watch the entire run of the show, and it was not bad. In fact, I would go as far to say it was pretty damn good for what it was. Granted, the first episode isn't great, but that goes for most other shows. TV shows need to establish the premise and the characters in the first episode as a means to introduce it to the audience, so the first episode typically isn't the best. Plus, the first episode is typically one of the first episodes created in a series, and the writers are still getting to grips with how to write the characters. But the rest of the episodes were honestly pretty good. The series focuses a lot on the relationship between Sammy and his family, particularly the relationship with his three sons. James figures that Sammy's the only father he has and wants to rebuild their fractured relationship. His brother Gary is much less forgiving of Sammy and wants nothing to do with him, and his brother Todd is pretty go with the flow and doesn't really care too much. The show also featured a number of talented and famous actors as well. Of course, the obvious one being David Spade playing the role of both James Blake and Sammy Blake. As James, Spade is pretty good since he's basically just doing his best David Spade impression, but as Sammy, he decides to do a sort of strained version of his voice, which sounds odd and makes it hard to distinguish the two characters at first.
Hey, shouldn't you be in Washington protesting the deadbeat dad bill? Come on, I missed you, buddy. It's me and you. Let's see. You haven't called in 5 years, yet all of a sudden you decided you missed me? How does that work?
That said, it does get better as the series goes on. Besides him, we also have actors like Janine Garofalo, Mila Kunis, whose character was strangely recast after one episode, David Cross, who plays a number of random characters, and Bob Odenkirk, who, if you don't know, is fucking Better Call Saul.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Have you or a family member had unwanted exposure to genitalia?
The art style of the show is also very unique, even for the time. The show has this weird Klasky Supo-esque art style that gives the characters a unique caricature look to them. There seems to be like a big emphasis on the noses, like every character in this show has a big nose. Looking at photos of the cells that were sold off, we can look at the art in a much higher quality, and it's cool to look at the art in this manner. The level of detail these cells were able to capture allows us to appreciate the level of effort that went into creating them. The ending of the show really hits you hard though. The first season establishes and focuses on the rocky but healing relationship between Sammy and his sons, and most of the episodes have that serve as the basis for the plot. And the last episode of the series is about James and Sammy's relationship on one of its worst days, as Sammy throws a party at James's house that overstays its welcome. After the party, James finds the baseball trophy he won as a kid irreparably damaged. This causes James to become angered with Sammy, to which Sammy insists that it's not that big a deal and that he was there when he won the trophy anyways. James thinks Sammy's just lying to him to try and downplay the situation, which only makes him more upset. But when Sammy doesn't relent and doubles down, James orders Sammy to leave his house and not to return. And after the second act of an earthquake rattling through LA and leading James to go searching for his family, the end of the episode comes with Sammy insisting one last time that he really was at the baseball game when James was 8. Just before driving off, Sammy repeats the phrase James exclaimed when he hit that home run all those years ago.
Well, I guess this is it. Goodbye, Todd.
Aw, you know how I hate goodbyes.
Actually, I did not know that. Jamie, so long. Take it easy, Dad. I nailed it! Look at that ball go! I nailed it! Look at that ball go! He was there.
What's that, Jamie?
He was there when I won my baseball trophy.
Yeah, of course he was.
You saw him?
Sure. He was hiding under the bleachers. So Mom won't hit him up for any of that child support money she's always yelling about.
Oh, no. Hey! Dad, come back! Sammy!
That cliffhanger stung, man. And it's not even like Sammy is some gripping revolutionary narrative or anything, but for what it was, I really enjoyed it, and I was invested in the characters. And that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. Sammy is, at its core, about the characters, and it pulls off the character writing quite well. According to Matt's contact, in fact, the crew thoroughly enjoyed their time working on Sammy, and liked the work environment during production. That's probably the biggest takeaway here. Whether or not the show is truly that good, the fact of the matter is that it clearly meant something to the people who worked on it. It was a show with effort clearly placed into its creation, and was Spade's semi-biographical passion project. The issues only came in when NBC got involved and pulled the plug on the show before it even had a leg to stand on. And that was Sammy. Finally, after 2 decades of this series eluding us and staying within the shadows, we finally managed to uncover it, mostly through sheer luck, might I add. Most lost media searches are by no means this straightforward. Many of them are arduous journeys of contacting crew members and staff and asking them if they have a copy of the media in question. Or in some cases, it's just a matter of waiting for someone with a tape recording to uncover it, digitize it, and upload it online. But we were lucky in this case, and the search for this cartoon was less tricky than some other searches. Perhaps it's a bit disappointing, but hey, the way I see it, Sammy is an interesting little show that had a lot of potential that deserves to be given a shot, especially considering it was never given it in the first place. And hey, I mean, if you're at all interested, the entire series is up on YouTube thanks to Matt, so it's only a few keystrokes away. I personally recommend giving it a shot. It's not for everyone, but you might end up enjoying it as much as I did. The nice thing about Lost Media is that satisfying feeling after a search is complete. That feeling of finally having something in our possession and easily accessible after all that effort is the rewarding part of this hobby. And now everyone is able to enjoy this series now for years to come. And it feels good that we now have this story completed. Now it's on to the next journey. Just what will we uncover next? I haven't got a clue. But until then, I'll be right here. Thank you for watching. And until next time, Low 5! Haha! Yeah, that's good. That's good.